Hello, I'm Kamla. My guest today is Pete Nix. His film, The Force, won an award at the 2017 Sundance Film Festival. He's an Oakland-based filmmaker, and he's making a trilogy of films on Oakland, and the second of that trilogy is called The Force. Let's take a quick look at the trailer of the film, and then come back and talk about The Force.
Sure.
So here's a clip from the film The Force, which is about the Oakland Police Department and the community of Oakland.
One police officer can affect the credibility of a department, of a city. One police officer can have an impact on this whole country.
This police department has a history that we have to own up to. It's our legacy. I don't want bad cops here, period. I don't need them. They can go.
Is the Force shooting in 2 months by the Oakland Police Department of black men?
We don't know the story. Don't nobody know the story. What happened? What's going on?
Patriotism, 1922.
Panicking under public pressure will get you dead. You get one chance to get it right.
What's your legacy gonna be?
How did you come up with the name, The Force?
Well, it's a name that describes the department. It's literal. It's also sort of
The police department.
The police department, the police force. It's also sort of a metaphor. This idea of the duality of force. Force can be good and it can be evil. And also the notion of the use of force. And this is why police departments around the country right now are being called to task about their use of force, their use of power, particularly in communities of color, where you have communities like Oakland, where you have predominant communities made up of large groups of African Americans or Hispanics, and so that was something that we wanted to kind of try to frame the film with the appropriate title.
Was that the title that you came up with, The Force, or did you have other working titles?
We tried tons of titles but there's been so many police movies, it's kind of like a genre, and so they've all been used on some level. It was one of the early ones, and it just kind of was hanging around, and we tried getting clever with the title to come up with something really new, but in the end, that one really kind of captured the complexity of the film, the duality, the double entendre idea of the film.
Very interesting film, and you had to wrap it up at a very interesting point in the history of Oakland.
Yeah.
Why does Oakland have such a bad rap?
Well, I think a lot of the story of Oakland tends to get delivered to broader audiences via the media and now social media, and that tends to sort of flatten things out into a more two-dimensional narrative just because there isn't enough time, in a news report or a headline or a news story to sort of unpack the complexity of a city like Oakland the way that The Wire unpacked the complexity of Baltimore. And the old adage, it bleeds, it leads, kind of drives the content, and then people, of course, consume that, and that inflects their view of the city. And so I think for many years, Oakland was kind of packaged in that way. There wasn't as much sort of going on in terms of entrepreneurial activity or growth, and so Oakland became kind of the sum of its parts, And now that Oakland is growing, which obviously has brought new problems with it, there's a lot more to tell, about the city. Not that there wasn't before. It's just you had to make more of a commitment to sort of going in and getting deeper with a community, with individuals within that community to tell that story. That's what we did with the waiting room, the notion of sitting in a waiting room, and we just asked people, we did a storytelling project before we made the film where we just asked people, what are you waiting for? And that simple question yielded profound moments of expression, and we filmed hundreds of these interviews and put them online. They're on our website.
So that was about the healthcare system in Oakland, and now this is about the police.
Yeah.
The Oakland Police Department was founded in the 1850s, so it's got a long history. And yet, I think for the last 15 years or so, it has been under some sort of a federal monitoring system.
Yes.
And when you started, your film was filmed over a period of 2 years, and that was a time when it looked like the police department would turn around, and then things went horribly wrong.
Yeah, well, they were close to satisfying the requirements of the federal, the negotiated settlement agreement, which was a court order that came as a result of a civil rights case in 2000, the Riders case, which led to the court oversight. And when we began filming, they had hired Chief Sean Went, and they had had a succession of chiefs before that, which weren't quite able to close the deal on the requirements of the reform for a variety of complicated reasons, and Sean Went was brought in to close that deal, and he was very close to actually achieving that. In that year and a half to 2 years that we filmed, we saw and we captured quite a bit of progress that the department was getting a lot of credit for, and they were kind of known nationwide as one of the more progressive police departments. And we were just about done with the film, which was in some ways a complicated film because it wasn't revealing all the things that people necessarily felt should be revealed about a police department. In other words, what are you hiding? What are they hiding from you? And we were internally debating that and wondering if this was going to be a problem if we were showing a film, showing a department reforming. Would the community be able to hold that truth? Was it the truth? Even we kind of wondered, And we were at the final stages of editing that film when, this scandal that became a sort of international scandal erupted at the OPD, and so we had to, make some pretty difficult decisions about
Did you have to re-edit?
Oh yeah, we had to change the whole film. So we had to figure out how to incorporate. At one point we thought maybe we won't include it in the film, maybe we'll make a separate film, but we were running out of money. The funders were very gracious to give us the resources to make this film, but those resources were running out, and we were running up against the Sundance deadline, and we felt that we had a responsibility to include that in the story, so we had to figure out very quickly how to incorporate that into the film and make some changes.
How satisfied are you with the end result? Because the film kind of ends at a very crucial point.
It's a piece of the larger story, and so in that sense, it's always difficult as a documentarian to stop, especially when it's a story like this where there's so much else to tell. And so in that sense, it's frustrating. On the other hand, we're proud of the film because it's a very powerful sort of clarion call for oversight, accountability, and responsibility within our public institutions. And it kind of reminds us, and this is why we do what we do as documentary filmmakers, is get access to these institutions that the average person can't get access to, go inside and tell that story. And I feel proud that we were able to accomplish two things, which I feel is show the police in a more three-dimensional manner.
That you did.
Humanize. But humanizing doesn't mean making someone look good necessarily. Humanizing means unpacking them in their full three dimensions, good and bad. And we also did that as well to reveal that there are still deep sort of issues and problems within sort of the culture of our police departments that need to be examined. And also we need systems in place to hold individuals accountable. And so whether that represents federal oversight or whether that represents what occurred in Oakland, which was the voting of a civilian police commission that has the ability to hold that department accountable, which now the Oakland Commission is one of the most powerful civilian commissions in the country, partly because of what happened, but also because of the pressure that the public has been placing, for a long time on the city to have that check and balance system in place that brings the community to the table. And so, You know, we're very proud of the ability to tell that story and to be able to have this film enter the conversation that's happening right now about police accountability, about trust, about what does public safety mean, about the consequences of poverty, which is a theme that runs through all of my work, in terms of when you have generational poverty, which needs to be addressed at a high national level.
It's almost a structural problem.
These structural problems lead to problems within the healthcare system, the education system, and the criminal justice system. And you could take every cop, every bad cop out of there. Those underlying structural issues have not been addressed. And so we need to examine those as well.
The one thing that opened my eyes is when you showed the police officers, there was one young, confident-looking police officer, and he's being trained for some sort of a gas thing. And he just couldn't handle it, you know, and I was surprised because we think of policemen as being the strong, you know, guys that we can go to and help us when times of trouble. But here is this cop struggling to actually survive that simulated gas attack. You know,
he's human. He's not a robot.
Yeah.
Like people think cops are robots. Well, actually, you know, they're human beings who make mistakes that have deep consequences. You know, abuse of power. You know, racially motivated violence or use of force, but also very just basic mistakes. You know, breathing in the wrong air hole in your gas mask. You know, that's a mistake anybody could have made, and he made it in that scene. And it just goes to show you. And part of the reason why we had that in there is to show you that, hey, you know, they're not actually robots. They're human beings that have to make decisions, and sometimes they make the right decision, sometimes they make the wrong decision. It's just the spectrum of sort of the consequential spectrum there is so profound, you know, from it's fine, you know, I'm going to throw up because I, you know, messed up with the gas mask, to someone's dead. Someone has lost their life because of a decision that I made. And that, we found that sort of spectrum, and where you sort of enter that spectrum as an officer depends on the situation, but officers enter those choices they have to make those choices every day. And so that's part of the reason why we wanted to understand who are these cops, how do they function under pressure, what does that look like, and the average person just doesn't have a view of that.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
We have, because we see them on 880 in their cars, you know, if you speed up, you know, they come, you know, so that's what we have.
Yeah.
How has your relationship and understanding of Oakland Police Department changed because you spent 2 years up close and personal with these guys?
You know, anytime you spend time with anyone, you're going to develop some sympathies. I've spent time with members of the Klan in the South, and it's, you know, there's no excuse for their ideology and for their hatred, but it's funny when you spend time with people. I remember spending time with the son of a Klansman, and he himself's not a Klansman, so it's not quite the same. But he would talk about how his mother, when he was growing up, his mom would iron the hood. You know, it's very mundane sort of descriptions, and you realize sort of how, you know, this stuff is sort of embedded into sort of ordinary life. It's really profound, and people, you know, our conceptions of people are based on, you know, images that we see in the media. When you get close to someone, you know, you just see them differently, and you get different angles on them, you know. And I think cops aren't quite the Klan, but in some people's mind they are. And, you know, there's a spectrum of...
You had a lady from the community who said that they can never reform.
Sure. You have some people who see the police as pure evil, all of them. You know, you have some people who see white people as pure evil. You know, we live white supremacy, all these things. And then there's everybody sort of in between. People have more nuanced things.
It's always a spectrum, though.
Sure, and you know, sometimes there's extremes on either side. And I went into the process of spending time with cops with an understanding that there's some bad actors in our police departments, and there are many of whom aren't even aware of how the decisions they made are affecting other people's lives, you know. and that there were also a lot of well-intentioned, idealistic people who were trying to change the culture of the department, right? So I knew kind of going in that that was my kind of approach to it, that there was going to be a mix. And then when I went in there, I think, if anything, I got a little bit concerned of the sort of the insular mentality of the department, because it's just by nature an us versus them dynamic, where you, particularly at this moment in time where there's such intense criticism coming from the community, nationally, on social media, in the news, criticism of the police, that I noticed fairly quickly that the police have developed a defensive posture and a resentment.
Because they're also humans.
Well, they believe in their minds that they're trying to protect us. That to them, Black Lives Matter. Like, they're trying to save Black lives. Like, so many of them go into their work every day. And the scene that we had in the beginning of the film, where the chief's at the protest and then he goes to the murder out east, encapsulates that we're having protests, and then there are murders happening out in East Oakland. And if all the officers are on the protest line, they're not out stopping murders. And so that was a profound juxtaposition that we noticed. But there's just a disconnect between sort of how the police see themselves and how externally how we see them, particularly as through the lens of an activist framework or sort of progressive movement that is rightfully so seriously questioning the integrity of this institution that has ties that go back to slavery, that has ties that go back to the civil rights, Jim Crow civil rights. And we've seen those images of police going to lynchings to keep the peace, as Reverend McBride mentioned. So it's just that certain communities and certain individuals carry those narratives in different ways than officers. But when you're a cop, whether you're Black, Asian, white, Hispanic, you still have a job to do. And so I think that's, we were trying to step into that complexity and try to make sense and try to at least give, each side another dimension. Both, challenge both the police in terms of how they saw themselves, but also challenge members of the community to say, hey, are you willing to look at this cop, differently? Or cop, are you willing to look at and understand this mother's anger, even though in your mind you think she's paranoid because she thinks the cops killed her son? Well, here's the source of that paranoia. Do you understand that? Do you understand the history of this country? And trying to make those connections through storytelling, because that's what Reverend McBride in that academy class was doing. He was telling stories. So.
Yeah. So that's why you're a chief storyteller.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the final film in the trilogy is on education. Have you started that? Sort
of, in the sense that, so much of this overlaps, and so the OPD has a pretty significant presence in the school system because so many young people are on probation, which is not normal in my mind.
Wow.
And this is the same in many cities around the country. I was just in Miami recently. They have the Miami-Dade School Police vehicle. Looks just like a police car. In my mind, that's not normal. When you think about students just trying to deal with the achievement gap, deal with poverty of itself, coming of age in a city like Oakland, trying to graduate, and you throw
the force
on top of that, and you think, how, man, I mean, that's like the decks are really stacked against you. And so we also met a number of young people who are going through the cadet program, which is, OPD is trying to recruit more young people from Oakland to become police in Oakland who have that cultural competency
and connection
to presumably deliver more compassionate, I'll call it service, to the community, because that's what the police are supposed to be there to protect and serve ultimately. And I think their role, or what people believe that they're doing, is not anything near serving, right? It's more of a terrorizing thing. And so that I found very interesting, is the sort of young people who are still coming of age, young people who have decided they want to be a cop. What does that mean? And
So is that what the education story is going to be about?
You know, I'm like brainstorming like in front of everybody, in front of like right now, like I'm not sure which direction it's going to go, but I don't really have as much of an interest in making a film and saying, oh, here's how screwed up the education system is in Oakland, you know, or making a film about the debate between charter schools and public schools. I'm trying to find a more nuanced approach to letting just like The Wire kind of set the film in certain environments, but really took you into the internal lives of the characters.
So you're looking for
more of a character-driven thing. You asked me, like, how do I feel about the Force, and what are some of my misgivings about the film? Is that the film, to some degree, I got hijacked by the issue, and we didn't do as much character exploration as I typically would, you know. And as I did with The Waiting Room. So with this next film, I want it set in the world of education, but not so much about the education system per se. Because I think we know enough about education systems in underserved communities. We know, right, that they're broken.
Yes.
They're not serving.
So you're not saying
people.
anything new by.
I don't think that would be revealing anything to people. But I think what we do need to understand on a deeper level is who are these kids who are coming of age in these school systems that are intersecting with the criminal justice system in ways that are not normal, that don't have access to health care. You know, it's really in some ways trying to tie together the three themes into a final film. One of the first people we met when we were making The Waiting Room was this young girl, junior high school student who had been shot outside her school, and she was in the waiting room and waiting to see a doctor and to care for her wound, and very just nonchalant about the whole thing, you know. And she was,
so it's a normal occurrence?
It has been normalized to some degree, and I think, you know, she's missing days of school. How does that affect her?
It's so different
outcome?
from your childhood.
Oh, I mean, radically different, you know. So, you know, I eventually succumbed to addiction, like many people do, regardless of class stature, but that's something that I can either overcome or not, and I can have a lot of support.
But you had a normal high school.
I can have, yeah, you know, I think
normal,
you weren't
shot. I mean,
normal is like, you know, what is normal kind of thing.
Not like this kid who got shot.
Normal. This is normal to them, and I think that's the problem, is that, you know, being surrounded by violence and not having a doctor, you know, I still. Dr. Earl and Dr. Strauss were my doctors from the age of 3 until I was in college, you know, and I remember them, and they were my doctor all the way through. And they knew me, they knew my parents, you know, so how many kids have that, you know? So to me, that was normal, you know, and so it's more about really trying to sort of, and along the way, meeting a lot of these kids. And my wife works at Highland Hospital. She works in the, you know, in the ED at Highland, and she comes home with all these stories about kids who've been, you know, whatever, gangbangers, people who are caught up, who've been shot, some of them are bad people, you know, so let's get that out. Okay, no question about it. And you don't want to meet them in an alley, right? But so many of them are just like the stories that she tells, and their character and their stories and their personalities, and I don't think people have access to that. People only have access to the stereotype, you know, and so that's my mission, is trying to tell those stories and reveal those.
Break the mold.
Yeah, reveal those sort of aspects of, you know, who are we in our communities? Our communities are layered with problems sometimes, you know, like Oakland is, but what's beneath the surface? You know, that's really what kind of motivates me.
Pete, I wish we could speak for some more time, but we have run out of time, and I truly appreciate you sharing your story and why you make films and why storytelling is so central to your life.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
If you missed any of our shows, you can watch them on our YouTube channel or on our website, kamlashow.com. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back again next week with another edition of our show.